All of us weekend warriors know that pro athletes aren't like you and me. They're stronger, faster, and simply the best of the best. But what's the toll taken on the bodies of athletes, especially for players in the most popular sport in America, football? In our next session, we'll explore hard-hitting and head injuries in football. But first, an excerpt from the powerful documentary American Man, which profiles the struggles of former NFL running back Kevin Turner. Turner has been diagnosed with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, which has been linked to head trauma in athletes.
May of this year, I was diagnosed with ALS. And although that's hard to say. Although it doesn't seem like it, because it doesn't affect my legs yet, there's a lot of me that doesn't work quite the same.
He's probably had a football in his hand since he could hold one.
He just gave it everything he had every game.
He took the talent he was given, and then he worked harder than everybody else, and he achieved his goal. I mean, that's how he got where he got with the NFL.
Go, attack it out.
You know, I started playing organized football when I was 5 years old. My dad and one of his friends coached me, and we had a little group of us that he coached for 5 years, just like I did my older son.
I didn't know that was Kevin Turner coaching out there until I saw his arm.
Yeah,
that's who it is.
That's my son.
Oh, it is? That's a shame. That's a shame.
Yeah, it's tough.
I had a good friend of mine, played basketball at Georgia Tech when I was in Atlanta, died of ALS.
Yeah, it's an awful disease.
It's a debilitating thing.
It is.
I think you know what the prognosis is and all that stuff. And
I have a guy that works with me that had it, died of it last year. He was older, yeah, not as good a shape as Kevin, but he went.
Yeah.
How critical is this issue of assuring parents that this is a game that's safe for their kids?
That's advancing the situation. For many years, the NFL has been in denial, and there was a saying, this is not football related. And because of some great work with the New York Times, certain reporters and certain medical people proved that a lot of these things are football related. The coaches did not have the knowledge of not to put a young person back in a game after they have received a concussion. The whole concept of being macho man is now proven to be ridiculous. So I think with the consciousness that's being developed at this particular time and the league willing to admit that some of these things are football related, scientifically proven, that I would not make a decision on my kids at this particular time. I would have to see what the outcome of this new attitude is.
We have to agree and we have to appreciate that the football that we played for the last 50 to 100 years was far too dangerous for anybody involved. I mean, and the brain bank, it's not a great way to study people post-mortem to figure out how many people have this, but 18 of the first 19 former NFL players we studied have it. Every college football player we studied have it. We found it in high school football players as young as 17. It's bad. And so what now that we finally have agreed that this is real, we're trying to figure out, can football survive? And the way we're doing it is not unlike the cigarette industry. We're going with light cigarettes. Well, what if we cut the number of hits to the head in half, and we treat the concussions, and we educate, and the medical care gets better? Fingers crossed, that works. But, that's all you have is hope. The science isn't there to say where we've taken it or where we're going to take it will be safe enough.
There's a cardinal rule in medicine between you and your physician, which is I have to inform you of the risk. and you have the right to make the decision. To Chris's point this afternoon, we're not informing all of our Division I athletes of this risk. And that's the first step. And I agree with Jim. I mean, I can't answer that question yet. We're working hard to answer it. But until then, I think the best thing that we can do is let people know there is a risk, and you have to make that decision as parents.
I think one of the largest things is changing the culture of, like Mr. Brown said, of the tough man, just keep going if you can walk, and you know which side to get on, keep going.
There was something that I found after I shot this film, and I just want to read this for a minute because it speaks to the culture, and not just the way the game is played on the field and the way that the guys should play it. This was a letter to the editor at Sports Illustrated, and it was in response to an article that said, here's what it said. The first sentence in your sub-headline from your story about the LSU-Alabama game last fall reads, "An instant classic it was not." I have to ask, what game were you guys watching? That was the most intense, hard-hitting, and exciting football game I've seen in a long time. True gridiron fans know that defense and collisions are what make football great. Pads crunching, bodies colliding, ground and pound. That's what we live for. Those are fans. And if that's all they appreciate, and that's what they see on Saturday and Sunday, and they don't see Monday, and they don't see Monday 20 years afterwards, how can they understand what these guys are going through? And that culture has to change as well, not just the way the coaches and the players act on the field, but the fans and the way we appreciate the game.
And the question then becomes the premise of how many times should a child, you almost have to go to evolution, how many times should a child be hit in the head in sport? I mean, now that I don't play anymore, I realize I don't get hit in the head very often. And the high school players will be recorded taking 2,200 hits to the head in a year. How many people here have been hit in the head one time this year? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. How many people here were hit in the head 25 times this year? None of you. But your children, if they played football, got hit in the head 1,000 times.
So what are some of the reform measures that are in place right now, and how effective are they? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the hit count. I know Pop Warner, recently reported about some new measures they're taking. Tell us about that.
Sure. The number one thing you can do to make youth football safer is to lower the exposure, and over half the exposure comes in practice. So what we've been pushing for, the NFL was actually the first to move on this. They can only have 1 day of hitting a week in practice. And the Ivy League said, all right, 2 days is the max. Pop Warner then went to 3 hours a few weeks ago. So no more, they went from 10 hours a week of kids colliding to 3 hours. That's gonna dramatically reduce it. And one of the things that we are pushing through Sports Legacy to advance that discussion of less is more is something called a hit count. Basically, now that we have sensors and helmets, we can count how many times people are hit. And we saw what happened in baseball with pitch counts. There was a little bit of evidence that said you could wear out your elbow if you throw too many times. And so Little League then adopted this program where if you're 10 years old, you can only throw 60 times. And if you're 12, you can throw 70 times. And you're mandated 3 days of rest to let your elbow recover. And we sat around and said, gee, I think your brain's more important than your elbow. And so why don't we limit how many times you get hit in the head and maybe mandate rest in between hitting days? And I think that's the fastest way to get to lower trauma. Is it enough? It's still high. And then you're getting into, you have to diagnose your concussions. We miss 90% of them because children don't know to speak up. We don't have the technology to see them. Kids are now having to see a doctor. There's laws in 40 states where you have to be cleared by a doctor. That didn't exist until recently. So we're trying to hit it on a number of different angles. And the question will be, is it enough? You could get to 20% of the brain trauma in football. You could. Right now, people aren't committed to that, but we might get there.
Dan, you're working on, tell us about what you're working on.
So we actually use not a hit system, which is the helmet-based system. At Stanford, we use a mouth guard, which is, in truth, it's not our own technology. It's from a company in Seattle. Our engineers kind of futz with it. And we use it in our football team. We like it because we can also use it in soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, so women's sports. For the first time, we can now study them. And one of the best things, there's a lot of great things that Chris has done, but the hit count issue is so logical. It makes so much sense. And we're working hard to kind of meet his demand, because if you think at it from my point, or as a scientist, or fellow scientist, I don't know what constitutes a hit. Is it 15 Gs or 10 Gs? And of course, we don't want to get lost in the morass of science. But, if I hit you in the thorax and your head goes like that, does that count as an impact? So we're really trying to work through that while at the same time getting our scientific heads out of the mud and saying, look, this is good stuff and this is important stuff. So that's kind of the majority of what we're doing right now.